just got home from the club. It's 1:38 a.m. right now. And I had to walk all the way through my house without any lights on. Now, of course, it is a casual kind of thing. Something I do often, without fear and without hesitating. But for just that alone, my younger self would be absolutely proud and shocked. Because when I was younger, I used to be petrified of darkness. I used to be terrified of being anywhere without a light on. Because I was afraid of the darkness. I was afraid of the shadows. But after 2 decades on this earth, and countless sleepless nights, I've come to realize that if there were no shadows to things, if there were never shadows, then nothing could truly be. How are you to tell a universe filled with light any different from a universe with a full absence of light? How are you to tell the thing exists if there is no contrast to make a difference between the foreground and the background? And thus I have come to realize both are necessary. Both are equally beautiful. And together, only together, can they form infinity. A spectrum forged by 2 vices, upon which you can find yourself any portion along that line, that spectrum. And very likely one that no one else has ever experienced. Because between just 0 and 1, you can go infinitely small. And so, by developing such a spectrum, you now also create this gray area. And if there was not this gray area, how would you ever be able to tell or rather, how would it be possible for there to be transitions between the two? I mean, sure, you could just go from black to white to black to white, but once again, recall, one or the other by itself in absolute is no different than the other. If you only ever heard the maximum loudest noise that you can possibly hear 24/7 from the moment you were born, how are you ever to tell what sound is, what silence is? And vice versa with silence. How are you to tell what sound is if you never heard anything? Both are necessary. And the answer lies between the two. In every single thing that is, it has its opposite. Because if it didn't have its opposite, its absence, then there would only be a presence of such a thing. And then everything would just be that one thing, with the inability to change along a spectrum. That is what I've come to know. Anyways, it's March 1st now. Yeah. It's such a shame how all of us are speaking the same kind of truth of love, of virtue, acceptance and forgiveness, but we see it in different ways. And we argue and bicker and bite and claw and kill, or the different ways in which we tell the same message. It is a tale as old as time, and it will perhaps always be. But at the utmost least, at least we are all on the same side, whether we realize it or not. And regardless of what we think and believe in, we are still all in this together, nonetheless. And through that, everything's already sorted out in the way of existence and life. What's not sorted out is humanity. What's not sorted out is our ability to unconditionally love one another, no matter what. Because hate met with hate, justified, quote unquote, or not, still puts more hate in the world. Still puts more anger or frustration or whatever it may be. It doesn't necessarily have to be what we call hate. But all of these things are an absence of understanding, an absence of virtue, an absence of compassion, unconditional compassion, infinite compassion, empathy. That's all it really is. That's all it really is. Because we're all one thing. We're all one system, made up of tinier and tinier systems. Recursively, everything forms itself. Ad infinitum. Until perhaps it inevitably returns to nothingness, but even nothingness has the potential for everything to be born in the same way in which everything has the potential to return to nothingness. Or perhaps because in that null space there exists no entropy and no time, and thus if the potential for something to happen exists and is woven into nothingness itself, which seems to be the case based on our very existence, being what it is, we are direct proof that somehow anything can come to be. And seemingly, from the root of null, of nothingness, before the first thing ever, whether it be a conscious God or just something that just manifested. And since this potential lies in nothingness itself, and since there is nothing, quite literally nothing, then there is no entropy. And if there is no entropy, there is no flow of change, time, however you want to phrase or construct of it. aka just no change, no time. But since the potential still exists, and given enough time, what can happen will happen, right? Kind of like Murphy's Law. After an infinite amount of time, eventually, everything will have happened, including something happening from nothingness. And thus, everything is born again, even if it returned to nothing. Logic, the base of all science, and deduction and reasoning. The thing in which seems to, at least in our abstract sense of it, dictates how everything recursively unfolds and creates more of itself, copies, but different shades, different flavors, different kinds, but still the same at the core, with different filters atop. No. I lost my train of thought. To be fair, I am on 4 hours of sleep. And I've nearly been up for, well, actually, how long? It's 2 a.m. right now, to 11 a.m. I woke up at 8:30, so in 6.5 hours, it'll be 24 hours, meaning that it is 17.5 hours I've been awake for in a row. So, not that crazy then, but I am on 4 hours of sleep, so 17.5 hours on 4 hours of sleep is kind of crazy, and especially after me just driving to downtown and raving and walking around and all that stuff for a few hours and then driving back, so I mean, that too. But yeah. I remember what I was saying now. Logic, our word for it anyways, to describe this seemingly absurd axiom or list of axioms that is woven into existence itself, at least in our reality in this universe. But is it even possible for a universe or a thing or a collection of things to exist if not balanced seemingly perfectly in such a way in which our universe is, which permits life, which permits change and evolution to be aware of itself? Nonetheless, even if these universes were possible, if it does not support life, if it does not support nodes that can be aware of itself, change that is aware of itself, then it's like kind of the question of the tree falling in the forest with no one around to hear it, and if it makes a noise or not. The energy, the transfer of energy, the event happened, but the qualia of the sound, of the perceived vibrations caused by the event, there would be no one to hear it. Thing is, though, is that other trees could potentially sense it, so it's maybe not the best analogy. Perhaps another analogy that would fit it is if a boulder rolled down a mountain and hit another rock. But even then, perhaps boulders, perhaps things in general, have some level of consciousness. Perhaps everything is continuously experiencing nothingness until inevitably it becomes a part of a system that can basically add filters atop that experience of null, upon which now it can become aware of itself. Emergent properties, these things that happen when, microcosm to the macrocosm. It is basically a miniature version of the entire system as a whole now. So perhaps the entirety of everything itself is conscious and aware of itself. Perhaps each of our cells that make us up are conscious in some way. Perhaps a level 0 conscious, but still experiencing nothingness. I don't mean consciousness in the same way in which we describe and perceive it as human beings, but rather qualia, more so, is what I mean by that when I say that. Experience. Who are we to say the wall, the air, anything that isn't still somehow experiencing itself? Even if it lacks all the neurons, all the whatever, right? The cells and etc. The ability to sense pressure or light or sound or smell or touch or whatever, right? It still is. And we're made up of a bunch of things that just are, collectively they allow us to perceive, but who's to say that everything that makes us up is not experiencing itself too? And collectively, as things conglomerate, experience multiplies. It becomes more concentrated and more elevated. And regardless, the value of any one thing, to experience something instead of never being anything in the first place, is the most divine thing I can define, other than change. Existence, playing into absurdism, right? But because it is the craziest, most ridiculous thing to be anything ever, and seemingly from nothingness and out of nowhere, seemingly, right? And spawning whatever else may come after, gods or not, right? Well, for me, what I believe to be the truest definition of God is everything, nothing, and the change between the two. There doesn't need to be some conscious entity for it to still be just as divine and wonderful of a gift. If they do exist, cool. I can't know for sure or not. That's just logic. I'm just going by the very fundamentals of my nature, of what I am, of what everything I know and am surrounded by is based in. The same logic, as far as we can tell. That's the thing. All I can ever know is that I know nothing. Shoutouts to Socrates. And so, understanding is a matter of how honest you are with yourself, the state of reality, how based in logic you are, how aware you are of all the details that make up the larger whole of everything that is. Whether it just be a simple little rock or a human being, the air. Nothing is ever just one thing. Nothing is ever just the face value, because you can define it. Anyone can choose to look at any one thing and define it with an infinite number of words, or perhaps no words at all, and they can pick and select whatever they wish to define it. And regardless, words are like vapor. They disappear as soon as they're spoken, and only in our mind does that value, or rather that definition of it, exist. To the object, the thing that it is, no label is attached to it explicitly or objectively or intrinsically. It's still just as ineffable as it was before you muttered those words or had that thought. But in your mind, however, you have evolved. Evolution once again taking place, whereas evolution is just another, version of change. A result due to change, the ability to change. Entropy, all of these different things, right? It's fascinating. And this isn't to say that I know everything perfectly. In fact, it is to say the complete opposite.
if I were to know anything perfectly, if there were to be any guarantees in life, any guaranteed knowing of something, any guaranteed thing to forever hold true, and not to be able to at some point potentially be proven false, then that means, it's already dead, in a way. That is death. The way I view true death is not the end of our biological functions, for that is another change. Just like how birth is a change, how the creation of everything is a change, how the first thing to ever come from seemingly nothingness is a change, for everything to inevitably perhaps return to nothingness is a change, and perhaps to just instantly snap back into being again because of an infinite amount of time comprised down into an instant, and with the potential for something to be born, and thus it is born. Perhaps that is the case, yes. But true death is no change at all. Because if there was never any change, if it reached one or the other of those vices and was guaranteed to stay there, quote unquote perfect, then there is no more story. There is no more change. There is no more human experience. There is no more life. There is no more nothing. If everything was to reach some sort of quote-unquote perfect state. But the truth is, it very likely will never reach that. And even once again, as I've spoken before, nothingness itself is one of those vices, but even nothingness has the potential to change. So it seems to all come down to potential as well. What permits change. The requirement of an opposite as soon as one thing comes into being, because it can only come into being if everything other than itself is the absence of itself, which can only exist if there is a non-thing of that, a nothing. Once again, as I was speaking earlier about in a previous audio log, I believe, I don't think it was this one, but one I just spoke on before I start doing this one, because I wanted to talk more on my stuff. How are you to tell that the foreground or the background exists if there was only a background or there was only the foreground? How are you to tell the difference? If there was only light, how are you able to see? Or, on the contrary, if there was only darkness, how would you be able to see? Either way, you are blind. You are blind. Different shades, different colors of the same dilemma. Vices. The extremes. I think I might take the previous audio log and append it to this one prior to this section for context as well. Because I went a bit more in depth on that topic as well. But yes, once again, if you were to be born into this world constantly hearing the maximum noise possible, just noise, and if there are any ravers or party goers listening to this by chance, you can probably know what I mean, where sometimes, or concert goers or whatever, right, or metal, fans and stuff, you can get to a point where it's like it's so loud and so drowning in sound, it's like silence. Because it basically is. But even then, of course, there's still slight fluctuations, so you can tell that it's like, oh shit, this is really loud, right? And also because you physically can feel the pain. But let's think for a moment that pain or whatever, like, let's just think for a moment that the ears were invincible and then they could take on any amount of sound. And one person was born constantly hearing the maximum noise 24/7. It doesn't go down a tiny bit constantly, it's the maximum amount. And another person is born deaf, completely in silence, never hearing a single sound. Are the two in the same dilemma? The answer is yes. Neither of them could tell you what sound is. In the same way, if everything was one or the other of this full state, quote unquote perfect, right, and guaranteed to continuously be that forever, first off, how are you to be born? How are you to transition from birth to death? If there is no such thing as this gray area between the two extremes. It's either one or the other, 0 or 1. How are you to live? How are you to tell a story? How are you to experience? You would be a still image, whether it be of darkness, of an absence of things, or a presence, forever and never. Because if it was a perfect state of presence, it would be no different than absence of everything. If it was all present constantly, 24/7, everywhere, then there would be no ability. And once again, if it was guaranteed to never change, then it would, once again, never change. And if you can't change, you can't have time, can't have entropy, can't have any of this stuff, can't have growth, can't do any of it. It's death. Perfection is death. And imperfection is life. That is what I've come to discover. And how wonderful it is that we, by some, whatever it may be, everything all playing into itself, including nothingness, including the potential for change, woven into nothing and anything that is, right? We can tell a story. I can talk right now, forming these sentences, chaining words together that I can only speak because of the flow and the flowing of time and the unknowing future. The unguaranteed future. And the past is but a memento. It's a keepsake to remind me of where I am here, now. But even my past memories, for as far as I can tell, right? Nothing's guaranteed. All I may know is that I know nothing. The universe could have just been made just now, and all my memories could have been implanted, or perhaps it's a simulation, and the simulation just booted up or rebooted or whatever, and now all my memories are implanted. Right? And so not even the past is guaranteed. Only the present moment, for precisely what it is and how you are experiencing it, is quote-unquote guaranteed. And that's it. It's a matter of what are you gonna do in the now. I could die in the next second. Any of us could die in the next second. The universe could end right now. I'd have no control over that. I would not even be able to predict it or see it coming, let alone stop it ahead of time. Right? Or maybe there was even a higher thing than that thing, where even if I was able to control the stopping of the universe or whatever, perhaps there's something even more greater that's outside of my sense entirely or outside of our system of logic. Right? There is no guarantee. There is no guarantee of holding true forever. And perhaps the same thing goes for false. Things staying false forever. Perhaps the universe dies and then it's reborn again with different fundamental particles or whatever, like, quarks and shit that give different properties, different physics and shit that makes something that was totally false and not possible in our reality possible in that one. Who am I to say? I'm not there. I'm here. And that's the difference. But either way, no matter where I am still experiencing. Even if I'm dead, I am just nothingness, experiencing nothingness. But I am still experiencing. I am still being. And even then, if you want to argue on that and say, oh no, absolutely not, you're not anything. Fair point, right? I'm everything and nothing at the same time, pretty much, right? Because once again, full everything and full nothing is both the same dilemma. But even if you argue for the worst case scenario, I will still have happened. Even if no one remembers, even if the entire universe dies and goes back to being nothing for eternity and never changes again, isn't that somehow more of a reason to make the most of this life? Right? Any way you look at it, you can still find a truly beautiful and optimistic way of viewing it. Because that's the thing, is it's not intrinsically guaranteed meaningful, but that doesn't mean it's meaningless either. It's neither guaranteed meaningful 100% of the time, nor guaranteed meaningless. It's both and neither. And simply, everything just is. And that's the greatest gift of all. Everything is. It is neither meaningful nor meaningless. But we, as the change between the two vices, aware of itself, can shift our perspective and thus define it to have as much meaning as we wish to give it, or as little. We can view it to be hell. We can view it with an absence of love and passion, to refute our very nature of change, to refuse the moment for what it is, to refuse all of it and be stuck in the past and the future, which are just different versions of the present in which you refute, and so even then, you do not find solace. In all of this being an absence of love, which is simply an embracement of being, an embracement of everything and yourself for what it is. Acceptance, forgiveness, virtue, and as much compassion as you can muster as a person. Let me just check I'm still recording. Okay, good. This is one of my better audio logs, so I don't want to miss out on it. However, right, continuing what I was saying, on the opposite side, if you fully embrace reality for what it is, if you come to analyze your experiences, critical thinking, and approach every situation with as much virtue as you can. And when I say virtue, I am in reference particularly to Aristotle's virtue ethics. Eudaimonia, the greatest good. Neither too much or too little. The Goldilocks, right in the middle, is the answer. Right? I particularly love this theory and the way Aristotle views it, most especially because it is what I myself have come to realize. And that is why I resonate with it. Because it is a reflection of me. And that's what we're drawn to. We're drawn to reflections of ourselves, and in reality, everything is a reflection of ourselves. Just some with more similar filters, but none have the exact same filters as you. And so, only yourself can be a true, actual, mere reflection of yourself. In the heart, in the mind, however you want to describe it. If you can learn to look in the mirror, internally, right, and maybe even literally as well, and love yourself, embrace every bit of you that you are. But in order for you to be able to do that, and truly be able to embrace that, you have to face every single corner of your mind. The things you fear the most, the things you don't even want to question on your own conscious level because you fear it so much. These things you hold on to for guarantees, these things you hold on to for control, when in actuality the truest definition of control is recognizing that virtually everything may as well be uncontrollable. But you, at least in this moment, as far as you can tell, get to choose how you view the uncontrollable things. You can choose to view and define all of infinity however you want. And that itself is an infinite power. Not a power that is exerted onto others, or constrains them, or belittles them, or pushes them down, but a power that frees. And yourself especially. Because of course you cannot guarantee such love will transmit or get across to the other person guaranteed in the way you want it to, because they aren't you. And you have to accept that too. You just have to try your best to do your best in the moment for what it is. And the best way for you to be able to do the best is to view it all in the best way you can. Because how you view the world shapes your actions. How you view your world is your world. That is the truth. And people could strip you of everything you own, could strip you of everything you love, could strip you of your freedom, put you in a cage. And even in that moment, if you still can somehow choose to love them, to choose to see and view them as an equal to you, to not hate them, but to understand that all these events in their life led up to this moment, and perhaps there is no such thing as free will, but even if there is, a lot of it is due to the heavy conditioning of the environment, or perhaps say everything is free will, and they willingly chose to be so terrible. They still are just as valuable as you, as a person or an intelligent being, or rather just a living thing in general, right? It could be an alien from another planet that could be doing this to you. And even still, you both still share equally and infinitely, ineffably, in the craziness and ridiculousness of existing instead of never existing at all in the first place. And that is the truest definition of beauty. So even the people we portray as monsters of this world are no different than us at the core. No matter what, they do. But based on what they do, and based on how they view the world themselves, they put themselves either in hell or in a state of heaven or a dance between the two, which is often the case, because neither is guaranteed. It's an active duty to act out of love and virtue. You can't just guarantee it always be heaven once you realize this stuff. I myself can say that. I'll bounce back and forth on the opposite sides of the spectrum where it's like, oh my God, I don't want to be alive today. And then the next day I'm like, oh, I'm so glad I'm alive. I'm so grateful for everything. It's a beautiful dance of all this stuff. I'm right there, right? Because I'm no better or worse than anyone else. I'm along for the same ride as anything else that is. Anything else that is existing. Even if we're in a simulation, the simulator simulating the simulation, I could ask, are you in a simulation too? And perhaps they know. Let's go ask the next simulators then. Are you guys in a simulation too? They're like, I don't know. It's the same dilemma, you know? Same dilemma. Or perhaps there's a God that made everything. I'm going to go up and I'm going to ask the God. And say, for example, it's a guarantee, or at least the God says, that I cannot lie to you, as far as my knowledge is concerned, right? And this God is omnipotent, omniscient, omnipresent, right? If I were to ask this God now, hey, what's up, dude? So, quick question for you. Where did you come from? Now, the God could say, oh, I have always been. But what if some other God were to make this God and grant them all the ability and power and knowledge other than knowing that they came from another God, and instead implanted the idea that they have always been, or the memory that they have always been? It's the same dilemma. And power is an illusion. Nothing truly has power over another thing. Only in our minds does it exist. Only in our minds do we bestow the power to another person, or give that action or whatever it is they're doing that custom definition of whatever it may be. But we could define that action to be any other way, view it any other way, give weight to it in any other amount as we want. And if you view everything as it is, where it's just, perhaps in control, perhaps not in control, either way, the true metric in which we can base the essence of one's experience of life or whatever it may be on is how honest they are to themselves. And only through being honest with themselves, only by analyzing it themselves, right? Not listening to the words of other people telling you what to do or what to think, but you yourself concentrating, analyzing yourself, because no one else is you. Only you have the experience of being you. And so you, of all things, got the best shot at understanding you firsthand. Get what I mean? Only you are thinking in that particular way, right? Or perhaps in a throwback to what I was talking about earlier, where maybe all our cells collectively are each individually experiencing something, and our experience is based on the conglomerated experience of all these other things that are experiencing, that we're made up of. In that case, perhaps the entire universe, or perhaps whatever, this larger structure, system that we're a part of. Perhaps our consciousness and our experience collectively form a greater experience as well, in the same way in which our cells and everything, our atoms and stuff that make us up, make up these more numbers of filters atop the same core of nothingness, of null experiencing null. Right? So in that way, everything is experiencing something. Just different colors of nothing. And when I say that, of course, I'm being poetic in my language. I don't mean literally has to be colors of nothing. If you haven't realized that by now, I don't know how you made it this far in me talking. The way in which I talk, I am limited by the English language, or just language in general, spoken language, right? There's only so much I can transfer through words in a given amount of time and with a select number of words to pick from. Sure, there's basically an uncountable amount of words I can pick from to use, and an uncountable number of combinations and stuff. But in a way, it's still finite. The number of possible sentences, or at least valid sentences, that I could come up with in terms of grammar and syntax and all that stuff. But even that is made up by us. In reality, it's this infinite blank canvas again. I could paint anything on it. But we've constrained ourselves to this little sliver of that infinite canvas, even if that sliver is infinite itself. Get what I mean? It's kind of like set theory, where all the numbers ever, right? And then there's a smaller subset, which is all the integers ever. All the integers ever, or all the countable natural numbers, or like Aleph Null, for example, is the name of the set, is infinite, but it's not as large as the infinity that it's a part of, aka all the numbers, not just the whole countable natural numbers. So yeah. And once again, even with more analogy, all the numbers can go infinitely small and infinitely large. So I was talking earlier about 0 and 1, It's kind of similar to where with a deck of cards, 52 playing cards, it's 52 factorial, different possible combinations, and so every time you shuffle a deck of cards, you are very likely to have just shuffled the first ever deck of cards that has all the cards in that combination, right? But now imagine, like, infinity factorial, or that's not even mathematically sound, but if you get what I mean, because 52 factorial, you got 52 cards, different combinations in which you can put it. But if there's an infinite number of events that can happen at any given moment, or even out of nothingness, and an infinite number of combinations in which those events play out, right? And that's the other thing too, is that no one event can ever be identical to any other event. In terms of, well, including the context of everything that came before, right? For an event to be exactly the same as another event, it would have to take place in the exact same place, at the exact time, and with the context of everything that happened before it, including whatever happened before the universe, or perhaps before nothingness, or before any beyond our comprehension, right? So since the first thing ever, which could go infinitely back in time, or even outside of time, and all this crazy shit that I can't even put to words, right? That's possible. Same place, same time, same everything, composed of the same stuff. And at that point, it is just that one thing still. It's not separate. Once again, it's just like the spectrum of vices. Because if it was just one thing, you could even pick one of the gray spots between the two vices, like a certain shade of gray between black and white. And if everything was just that, if you took another shade of that exact gray, it is that exact shade of gray, right? On the spectrum, if you were just talking in terms of position in essence, even let's just consider it no time is even involved in this equation. It's just a spectrum, and we got little points on the spectrum we can put it on. And you got 0 and 1. And you got 1 point that you come in and you make at 0.5. And now you have another point that's also at 0.5. Are there 2 points there? Or 1? Or 2 overlapping? And if 2 are overlapping, how is it any different than just 1? If there is nothing as time or anything else, they are both one and the same. It is that thing still. They're not separate. It's not separate events. It's not separate data points, right? Of course, you could define this problem in any way you want, but in the context in which I am trying to describe it, of course, I can't write a full entire research paper right now with my words out loud to fully capture the logic in which I am basing my stuff on. So perhaps this makes absolutely no sense to you, and perhaps it's not effective, which is totally okay, because I don't expect this to be, once again, guaranteed to work for every person that potentially listens to this, and even if anybody listens to this, because maybe no one listens to this audio log, because I've made fucking hundreds of audio logs at this point, and I probably won't even listen to any of them myself, because I have so many, so go figure. But yeah, it's the same thing with all this other stuff, right? And so perhaps there's an infinite number of simulations simulating us. Or perhaps there's an infinite number of gods making other gods that make up other gods that make up other universes that make up simulators that simulate universes and things beyond our comprehension, and it's all encapsulated within something that's entirely outside of our system of logic, right? But as far as we can tell, the only thing we can work with is the system of logic, because we can't even comprehend anything that's outside of our comprehension, right? You know what I mean? Like, that is a logical dilemma that restricts us by logic, in which we are based in. Our entire essence of everything is logic, right? And it's a whole nother question to even think that if it's possible for there to be something we can't understand, right? But even that we can't guarantee knowing is true or false. In the same essence, we can't ever know fully, truly, 100% guaranteed if there is or isn't free will. Because, of course, in the way in which I'm speaking, where all these events play out in particular ways on lower and lower and lower and lower and lower and lower and lower levels until you get down to basically nothingness. But once again, nothingness has the potential to be something, and since there's nothing there, then it seemingly snaps into being something again, right? But then what's that thing made of, if that's the smallest thing that can be? Is it made up of more nothingness? So in that case, is the more nothingness that's on lower levels instantly snapped into being something too? Ad infinitum downwards and ad infinitum upwards? So that's the other question, is it even possible for there to be true nothingness, true emptiness, true empty space? True null? And even that, we probably won't ever know fully. We can guess, though. That's the thing. Everything's a guess. That's why you gotta give it your best guess. Why not define everything to be in the most beautiful, wonderful way imaginable? That's exactly what my stuff is right here, right now about. So. I lost my train of thought again because I'm trying to say, once again, I am limited by language, by spoken language. I can't convey this information in an efficient manner, in such little time, and with my brain only able to basically flow one single stream or thread at a time of words. I can't be thinking of, unless if I had a split brain experiment, I have the right brain and the left brain fucking thinking of two different sentences. In that case, I only have one mouth still, so it's a bottleneck. I need two mouths that are connected to two different parts of two different brains now, basically. So it's like I'm two people now, basically. Like, they're not even communicating with each other because it's split. So, or maybe I need a multi-core, like a fucking processor. But even then, it's another philosophical question. If it, say for example, there's 4 cores, are they 4 different processors? or are they all collectively one processor? Well, of course, as a computer scientist, I would say, oh, they're one processor comprised of 4 different cores, which is basically 4 processors that make up one processor. So it's basically both are correct. And once again, recursion. Microcosm to the macrocosm. Smaller versions of itself make larger versions of itself. Different filters on top. And thus, at face value, is an illusion, as if that's what it is in its entirety. But it is not the case. It is a different version of you, and thus you. Any difference in terms of value of the core is an illusion, but difference in terms of the filters atop is a blessing. Because if there was no difference, then there would be no separate entities. And thus, once again, that would fuck up the entirety of all the recursive steps that are necessary in order to form you. All the lower and smaller things that make up larger and larger things made up of smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller things, that each of them, all those smaller things, need to be separate from the other. You could have 2 exact clones of a cell, but they can only be 2, quote-unquote, clones of the cell if they are now different in position, at least, or some other variable. If all their variables, if all the past stuff, the same time, same everything, were all identical, then they are literally identical. They are one. They're not separate. They're that perfect thing. Perfect, unchanging kind of thing, right? That's the thing, is that everything in that sense is perfect in its own way, quite literally by logic. It all is perfect with the ability to change into another perfect state, including any mix of gray, any mix of black and white of the 2 vices along the spectrum, including one of the vices themselves, potentially. But with the potential to go back the other way on the spectrum now. And every single step of the spectrum is its own vice, in a way. Because it's the only thing of that can possibly exist in that exact way. And thus it is the only existing presence of that variant possible. Because even if you took that exact thing and cloned it, okay, how are you to tell they're 2 different things? Unless you move them apart. In that case, they're different in position. Or perhaps different in time. Now, that's a difference in time. If you move one a little bit further ahead in the future, so they don't collide with each other, but they have the same motion, the same path, and all that stuff that they take. Or perhaps you have 2 separate universes. In that case, the difference is that they are not in the same universe. When I say every single parameter, every single variable is exact, I mean every single infinite possible numbers of variables possibly able to be defined. Exact. And if that is the case, it is that one thing. And thus, anything that is the only version of that thing ever. Because if it wasn't that case, right? And if everything was, well, let me think how to word this. Once again, they would not be separate things, right? It would be one thing. And if everything was, once again, all one and the same as that kind of thing, it would be that one thing. There'd be no difference. But even then, the absence of that thing, for example, all that there is, throw away everything else, throw away all of time, throw away anything that ever was or whatever, right? The only thing that's ever been now is this one thing, like a point in space, or a particle or whatever, right? That's just a point. Zero dimension. There is still, seemingly now, this absence of said point. It's kind of a dilemma, because a point on a graph is infinitely small. But if that's all that there is, perhaps it's infinitely large. And there cannot be an absence of it. So perhaps by it being both infinitely small, and thus basically nothing, but also basically filling everything up, if that is to be the only thing that can ever be, both are versions of nothing. Of absence. Vices, once again. I don't know if you have noticed by now, but it is pretty difficult to describe a lot of the things that I think of without like writing it down on paper or diagrams or whatever. But I am the most experienced in speaking my ideas. And so I guess it is my most efficient method of transferring the info, but it is still a bottleneck nonetheless. Because once again, I only have one mouth, only have so much time to say it, only have so many words I can use that fit what I'm trying to say in the language that I'm using. Etc., etc. But once again, my main point I'm trying to drive home is that difference is such a wonderful thing beyond the ability to be captured with words that I can ever define. It is a gift beyond comprehension. Because if nothing was different, we would all be the same thing. And even then, you could consider the absence of that one thing to be another thing. And then in that case, if there is to be no difference between a thing and a nothing, how do you even define that? It's a nothing beyond nothingness, which is what I refer to as null. Right? Say, for example, if the universal set was null. If you know set theory, just think about that weird-ass question. Just think about it for a second. That's what I'm, using as an analogy, at least, for it. Imagine if the universal set was the empty set. There's not really words to describe it. Ineffable, once again. And that's where, as far as I can tell in this current moment, that's where logic, the logic that guides everything recursively, right? And when I say guide, I don't mean it's omniscient or whatever, right? It doesn't need to be conscious for it to still be. Right? In the same way in which everything else that makes us up doesn't have to be conscious to still be and to experience null, right? To experience nothingness and then collectively creating filters of senses. that add on to the same baseless nothing. Perhaps a better quote I could use to describe it is, I don't know who said this, but I've used it a few times. I searched for God, and I found only myself. I looked for myself, and I found only God. A paradox presented by the two vices, at least in the context of this question. And that's precisely what everything is, as far as I can tell. It is a blend of the two vices. Duality on every level. And necessary, required for anything to be able to happen. Required in order for there to be life. Required for anything to be. And that is why I love wearing the black and white colors so much. Not only because I fuck so heavy with like scene core and emo and goth stuff, right? Metal stuff or whatever, right? And I just have always loved black and white. I've always found the coolest color combination my whole life, other than like hot pink and fucking neon green, but which I also wear with black and white. But I've said this in other audio logs as well, and I've written it down. I've also written on the Peak of Paradox document thing I made as well, but that is why I wear black and white so much. It is to pay homage. Homage to literally like the bare bones of existence. Required for existence. And of course, all these things I just spoke of, and I still don't know any of them for certainty. Someone may very well be listening to this right now and have formulated the perfect counter-argument to everything I just said. In that case, bravo. You should pat yourself on the back, because this is some crazy shit to be talking about and thinking about. So, and if you do, share it with me, right? Because it's about refining the guess. You can always have infinite more room to refine a guess, you know, in the same way in this, which there's infinite more room to grow and be anything else, because if there was an infinite room, if there was a finite number of remaining steps, once you reach that final step, everything is dead forever because nothing changes. And given that, you know, nothing has the potential to change anymore. So nothing ever happens. But everything will still have happened. And in that way, in those moments, they are eternal. Even when no one is left to remember, the one thing nothing can ever take away from it is that it happened. And as it's often said, be thankful it happened instead of being sad that it's over. That's life. Be grateful that you got to be anything. That you got to be born. That even if you weren't born, be grateful that anything happened in the first place. That the first thing ever seemingly came from nothingness. Or even if that's not the tale, perhaps it's always been or some shit, right? Be grateful that anything happened. And once again, even if it's always been, it's like beyond comprehension still. So it's like, just words can't capture it. Our language and the way in which we speak is based so heavily upon polarized terms. You have one thing and its opposite. You got a synonym, you got an antonym. You got this and you got that. You got past and future, right? Black and white, you got up and down, you got yes and no, on and off, with and without. I could say that wall and then the absence of the wall, which is everything but the wall as a whole other entity. So, same thing with light. You have light, and then you have the absence of light, which is what we call darkness. But the absence is required, because if there was only the presence of light, you wouldn't be able to see. And then there's no point in you having eyeballs anymore. Everything's just constant white light. So, plus you would probably fucking burn your eyes out. You're seeing that much damn light all the time. Like when I say only the presence of light, well, actually, now that I think about it, you wouldn't even be anything, because your body, all that space that your body takes up, that's also the presence. Now the light takes up that as well in the space. So it's like every single point along this 3D space is a photon. That's what I mean when I talk about if everything was just presence of one thing. There would be no room for the presence of something else. There would be, once again, no absence of this thing. And that is no different than if you were to take every single point and fill it with an absence of the thing. And that's nothingness. Because the points also can go infinitely small as well. It's very hard to talk about this stuff with words. But once again, just be grateful that you got to be born at all, that anything happened at all, that things change. Be grateful that things can experience, that things can exist, that everything is all painted on the same infinite blank canvas in which you can paint anything. Infinity. Infinite potential. An ever-changing, unending story filled with an infinite number of sub-stories that have their own sub-stories and whatever it may be, right? And once again, when I talk about stories, I don't mean literal, just fairy tale stories, right? I mean in a poetic sense. It is a timeline that can only be a timeline because there is change. And you can set the beginning and the end point to be anything, and for anything you're observing, or anything you create as an abstract concept such as an actual fairy tale story. Right? And if there is no beginning and if there is no end, and there is only change, the start point is negative infinity, and the finish time is infinity. And so the duration is infinity. And thus it's an ever-changing infinite story. Anyways, I think this was a really awesome audio log. I'm very happy that I did it. It's currently 3:17 a.m. in the morning now, March 1st, 2025. Once again, as I mentioned earlier, I'm on 4 hours of sleep. But it's funny because it's often when I'm the most tired and it's the most late at night that I have the most profound discussions to the air. And just so happen to be recording. Just kidding. I intentionally do it now. So if I'm going to be talking or thinking about this stuff, I may as well document it. Because then it can help someone else, potentially. Maybe even just myself in the future. Or even if no one listens to it, I still don't regret it because I follow my heart. This is what I love to do. Speaking about my love for everything. For what it is. And I And I process that love and embracement by talking about it and processing everything so that I can embrace it for what it is. Yeah, I'll probably post this on YouTube again and Internet Archive and other places. That's the other thing too, is I really miss making art on YouTube and stuff and posting on Instagram as well, but I want to get back into 3D modeling. However, I have been still very productive, just in other categories of art. And once again, when I say art, I mean everything is art. Depending on how you view it, anyone can point and say, that is the most beautiful thing I've ever seen. And you can't tell them any other difference, right? Because it's all ineffable. You can give it as much value as you want or no value at all. And anywhere in between. Once again, the whole point of this audio log. So, once again, that's why I say everything is art. Everything is beautiful because it has the potential to be defined as such. And personal. It's all relative. But yes, when I say I am productive in other versions of art, my focus has now looked more towards cybersecurity, pen testing, and activism especially. Because as a person who is trans and living in America, in this current administration, and with everything going on, and with people, fighting amongst themselves and hating each other, and all this ignorance and people lost in themselves and acting out of hate and a lack of understanding, indifference, the absence of love, the absence of compassion for oneself and each other. That's where all this conflict arises. And that's why we gotta sit down and have conversations with each other one-to-one and see eye to eye and make it very apparent that we are reflections of each other, that we are one and the same. Of course, you don't, if you sit someone down and start talking to them like, hey, you're a reflection of me, very likely they're going to be like, what the fuck are you talking about, right? Because the way in which I word a lot of this is poetic, but of course, the way in which you describe it and convey that message can be however you want to convey it. That's up to you. You put the words to it in your own unique way. If you were to do it the exact same way I did it, or if I was to do it the exact same way as someone else did it, like Aristotle did it with virtue ethics, then I would be Aristotle. You know what I mean? Or, rather, let's think about it this way. If I were to still be this person, this body, this time, but to think exactly like Aristotle and say it all the exact same way he said it, then in that case, I'm just a walking fucking puppet, I guess, of just filled with Aristotle, basically. I'm just Aristotle still. So it's like, that's the thing. It's like, and taking it back to free will, if everything is born sporadically, seemingly, out of nothingness, for no rhyme or reason, just boom, seemingly, based on logic, since to say something happened without a cause is contradictory in terms, meaning that everything comes from something else, at least in our system of logic, and goes back and back and back until eventually it seems like the only thing it can come from is nothingness. It comes from itself, keeps coming from itself, recursively, but what is the base case? I know recursion works differently, right? Because the base case is the smallest case until it stops doing recursion. But let's think about it in terms of like the first call of the function. How about that? That's actually that is actually correct if I think of it that way, or describe it that way. The first call of the function. And what called the first call of the function, if not itself in a recursive manner? If a recursive function calls itself again and again and again, yeah. So all those subsequent functions have been called by itself and manifested by itself and iterated by itself, whatever, right? But the first one, what is it started by? Of course, in terms of computers and stuff, it's started by, like the fucking operating system, basically. Now, if I'm really getting into technical terms, if it's on a Unix-based operating system, it would have to, like, go to the main function or whatever, the stack, the heap, all that fucking shit, right? But imagine, in terms of an abstract concept of it, right? Say, for example, this is just like an algorithm like you wrote on a whiteboard for a class or something, or whatever it may be. What, in that situation, right? If the algorithm exists outside of any environment or computer or admin system or root, whatever, right? What calls it to begin with? It seems like it shouldn't be able to be called at all if there is nothing built to call it. And now if we think of it in another term as well, if you are still not convinced, let's think of it as the operating system, right? Calls this function. So yes, the function is called by the operating system, but now the same question can be posed for the operating system. What calls the operating system? Well, the operating system is initiated due to a bunch of hardware shit and fucking electricity going into the computer and all that kind of stuff, right? The motherboard, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. CPU, yada, yada. Because the operating system is just another program, right? With some hardware stuff as well to help it out, like timer interrupts and stuff. But now you can pose the question as well, what called, or rather started, this flow of electricity, or the hardware stuff? I mean, like, all of it is because, the hardware stuff is also because of electricity, right? At least in computers nowadays, for the most part. Let's consider that it's entirely just random electricity for the sake of simplicity here, because I can go down any and all branches and pose the same question and arrive at the same conclusion, because this is just logic. And so, what called the electricity? What started the electricity? Well, you have that wire running into it. You have to generate the electricity. The whole ability for you to generate electricity and all this stuff is due to entropy, because electrons want to move, to places that don't have, or I'm not a physics major, so it's some shit to do with negatively charged shit, positively charged shit, right? All that kind of stuff, right? So it's like trying to fill the spaces that it needs to fill. It's pressure and all that stuff. Entropy is the main kind of takeaway of it. And entropy is change, right? But what started change? What started entropy? What started time? And now you're going to say the Big Bang, right? What started the Big Bang? And that is ineffable, as far as we can tell currently, until perhaps say we did figure out what caused the Big Bang. Right? It was something else. Maybe it was a conscious God. In which case, refer back to what I said earlier, where now I could pose the question to the God, and they could be like, oh, I have always been. But then what if they were made by something else that gave them all the ability other than to know they were made by something else? And thus they are in the same dilemma in which we are in now. A paradox. You can't truly guaranteed 100% no. Otherwise, it is no different than death. It is no different than nothingness. In that case, dog ain't even anything. No? By logic, at least in our system of logic. But now let's, instead of going down the God route, let's go down a different route where it's like the Big Bang was created by itself. And now we have come full circle back to the original question of me posing this function, this recursive function. If the Big Bang was caused by the Big Bang, which was caused by another Big Bang, what was the first call started by? And now we're in the same dilemma again. For infinity. in our system of logic at least. That's just how it is. And we have to be content that all we can ever do is guess. But that is also the greatest gift. If we knew everything, if we already had everything, if we've already done everything and experienced everything we could experience, and no need to do anything else, and we're omniscient and all that stuff, omnipotent or whatever, when we're born, then we're dead before we even began to live. Because you can't change. You already reached the end goal. But that's the thing, is that there is no end goal. The end goal is the present. For infinity. You're at the start and the end. Constantly. In fact, the start and the end doesn't really even exist. It's just the now. Everything just is. It's not meaningful or meaningless. It's not with or without. It's both. You know? No guarantees. No guaranteed 100% one thing or another. In fact, everything is its own perfect, unique version for infinity. This is one of my favorite audio logs I've ever done. I really enjoy the way in which I phrase this stuff. But once again, it is not perfect. Because if it was perfect, then I would be no different than dead. As in perfect, as in a vice, but I guess I am perfect in my own sense of the word, just in the same way in which anything else is perfect in its own version of itself. Everything is its own center of everything, forged by everything, in which everything is a gift that forms it, in which that thing is a gift back unto everything. Everything is itself, reflecting itself, formed by itself, forming itself, forever. And even if the first call ever came from nothingness, that just shows that the potential for everything lies within nothingness itself, and from nothing, everything is born, and perhaps everything returns back to nothing. And in that case, nothing will just go back into being everything again. And so there is no true death. There is no true end. And since we've already been born from nothingness once already, the potential for us to be born from nothingness, right? From what we can tell, because we were already dead before we were born. And then we were born again. Perhaps we lived another life, or perhaps this is the first life we've ever lived. Perhaps it's the only one we'll ever live. Because once again, it's not guaranteed, but then will always have happened. And in that way, we're already eternal. Outside of time, we are happening forever and ever in an instant. And once again, if everything comes from something else, even if the very concept of change itself comes from something else, which is a really weird question to ask, in that case, to that thing, which is before time, before change, before any of this, right? Everything is eternal. And remembered, even if the thing's not conscious, perhaps it's a conscious God, perhaps it's not. At least to that thing and from that perspective, everything is eternal. And that is why I say this is already heaven or hell. I think that everything that is collectively forms this infinite, compassionate heaven. And it is only shown as an illusion to be hell when we lack the understanding of its essence, of its architecture, the archetypes that form it and permit it. And even the architect, the foundations and stuff, perhaps can even change as well. Physics and all this stuff, right? Or whatever, right? But perhaps those don't permit life. In that case, once again, even after we die, if we return to the same nothingness in which we were born from, that means, straight up, we don't have any senses. We don't sense time. We don't sense the passage of time. Perhaps we're all the particles that once made us up, now individually experiencing their own nothingness again, split apart, after we decompose and are scattered about. In that case, maybe those particles will go on to make up different animals and allow them to tell their stories. And perhaps someday all of them will rejoin in such a manner where we are born again and conscious. Or perhaps we're everything already that's conscious. And we're just one window of that collective consciousness, the noosphere, as Pierre Teilhard de Chardin would put it. And, yeah. And when we are dead, and we can't sense time, once again, the potential for something to happen, if there is a potential for something to happen, for something to be born from nothingness, we have already been born from nothingness once, born out of seemingly nothingness, once already. And so we are direct proof the potential exists. And so once we die, if we return back to nothingness, perhaps there is an afterlife, like straight up, with spiritual shit or whatever. We'll know when we get there, in that version of the now. Once again, it's only the present moment that's guaranteed, right? When you get there, in the moment, in the now, focus on the now, focus on you, love everything in the now, in the current moment, and you're eternal and free. View everything to be heaven, and it is heaven. But once again, say for example, there is no afterlife. Well, that's the thing, is that the way in which I was phrasing it before, if you don't sense anything, but you're still experiencing nothingness, as perhaps these individual particles, or perhaps all of the universe goes back into being nothingness, but perhaps a single point, which is both everything and nothing, so both devices, perhaps you are still part of that experience of nothingness, and so you are still experiencing. So your story is still continuing. You're still alive because things are still changing and have the potential to change, even if they're not currently changing in the moment. And so given an infinite amount of time, if you can't even sense time, you will snap straight back into being. Based on just our logic that we have to work with. Once again, everything is a guess. Give it your best guess. Logic is the best way we can make a guess about anything. Otherwise, we can make up whatever the fuck we want and say that's the truth, which you could do too. But it ain't gonna bring you into loving everything for what it is. It's just gonna make you trying to fit everything to be your narrative or your definition, when really it's only ever in your mind. Nothing fits any definition. 100% guaranteed. It's ineffable. And we try to approximate it with these made-up phrases and constructs. Just like math as a whole, all these different things, are abstract things we came up with to grasp this underlying and thing that just threads everything together, in which we could have defined an infinite number of ways, seemingly, potentially, but that's a whole nother philosophical conversation. If math is objective or not, right? You could look to other counting systems like the Mayan counting system that used base 20, or you look at hexadecimal, but that's just with bases and stuff. I'm talking like, I can't even put it to words, but I hope you understand what I'm trying to say. A lot of things I'm trying to say. And a lot of things that keep bouncing back and forth. Sometimes some of them get lost in the process, because I only have one mouth. But I do got a lot of time, or maybe no time. I could die right now! Just kidding. Or maybe I wasn't. Maybe I did die, and everything was born again and my memories were implanted. I don't care. I'm still here experiencing. Oh, fuck. Forgot all that. Damn, bruh. I got this orange juice. I didn't just remember that I got orange juice. I didn't even drink it. I was talking for the last hour. I love orange juice. I got these cool stickers from this dude that was this nonprofit called Against Drunk Driving. I got a ton of free stickers. I donated like $5 to their stuff. It's pretty real. One of the stickers says, "Stay fuck out of prison. We keep it raw and real on this channel against drunk driving." And then another one that says, "Toucan, play that game." And it's just a picture of a toucan. And then these like people in like LGBT clothes. And then another one that said, "They had us in the first, never gonna give you up." Which I think, I don't even know what that one's supposed to be. That's just Rick Roll. And then "I do house parties." And it just shows Bernie Sanders, like this low-ass quality image of Bernie Sanders and people in the background. And then this one says, "Stay up like we do in Europe." I don't even know what that's supposed to mean. The background is like inverted colors and deep fried. With some dude that looks like Bill Gates on the cover. I don't even know. And then this one says, "Bam, puck, yes." And it's a super deep fried image of the chef dude with like clip art chili peppers coming out of a frying pan. And then this other dude that's like looking at the camera that looks like the dude from The Shining. But anyways, perhaps you found that entertaining. I'm gonna put some of those on my laptop, which is actually a Chromebook I got off eBay for $50. And it has Kali Linux on it, so I can test it. I also start buying a ton of books, because I love reading. I used to read a lot for free. And, well, not for free. Yes, for free. Some of them wasn't for free, because I had to buy the book. But I used to read for fun a lot in high school. And I stopped because of COVID. It kind of fucked me up. And I became addicted to my phone. And then a couple days ago, I forced myself to read for like 7 hours straight. And I physically felt the urge to want to hold my phone and stuff. Until I analyzed it every time I felt it. And eventually it faded away. Now my hands crave the feeling of a nice fucking book. I got this book that I really like the cover of. It's by Nora Sandler. And it's Writing a C Compiler. Build a real programming language from scratch. And it has this silly looking goofy dragon and a robot. And they're like, "Oh, look, it's a windmill." I like that. It's pretty real. I haven't even read a single thing out of this book, but I have read it out of this book over here, which is Linux Basics for Hackers, which is for pen testing. And it's by Occupy the Web. It's a shorter one compared to the other one. I have another one that's coming in, which is just the Linux Bible. It is literally called the Linux Bible, which is supposed to be really good, because I want to get really good with Linux, than I already am. And then the C programming language is another good one that I'm getting. And I also start getting activism books, because of all the crazy shit going on in the U.S., and I don't know if they're going to start literally banning books, so I bought ones that I thought they would ban, including The Handmaid's Tale. I have the Constitution of the United States of America, because they're trying to apparently change the Constitution now and rewrite it, which is in this audio log I don't want to get starting to talk on that stuff, because I already do a lot of that stuff already in my free time, and activism and politics and protests and all that stuff, which you can, if you know my Instagram, that's like all I post on there now, so Because that's another thing too. I got to act on what I talk about, right? What I talk about is love for all people, and helping people realize we're all one and the same. And that especially means fighting against this hateful rhetoric that divides people and demonizes people and makes them seem like they're not human. And we're all equal. We're all one and the same. Even if we weren't human, even if we were some alien, we're still experiencing a null. Even if we're not even a living thing, still the same. That's my guess, though. What's your guess? And regardless of whatever guess it is, regardless of where I may find myself, right? Perhaps I wake up after death and it's in some crazy ass thing beyond system of logic, and now it's based in hatred or whatever, right? Right? And apparently in the system of logic it guarantees that everything's terrible, whatever. Even then, right? If, as far as we can tell, with us being this relative perceiver, right, and you can think or whatever, like, how would you even... It's beyond comprehension. If we're trying to talk about something outside of our system of logic, I can't even literally begin to come up with a idea of what it would be to be a living thing in a system outside of our system of logic, if it's even possible. Let's say, for example, it is. And I am still able to be aware myself. Still seemingly, change is what drives everything, if I can even be aware and make connections, right? So tracing things together, or perhaps in the system of logic, it's like everything all happening simultaneously at a single point in time. And so time is non-existent, but it's also like changing in the sense in which it infinitely unravels itself at that point in time. Which maybe is an analogy to our system as well, but... Because infinity is basically everywhere in our system, so anything that's infinite can be analogous to infinity in our system on any fucking level, but... Oh, I forgot to say, another book I got, 1984, classic. I never actually read it, though. Same with Handmaid's Tale, that's why I'm reading it now. What I was going to say, though, is even in such a system, even in the worst case scenario, if you can still view everything to be beautiful, it is beautiful. It's that simple. I can't begin to give you a precise example of something outside of our system of logic, because I don't even know if it's possible for there to be such a thing outside of our system of logic, if there is even such a possibility of an outside system of our logic, because perhaps anything that is a system has to be bounded by structuring of recursion, which is once again what I was talking about earlier, where everything, our universe could die, and then another one could be made, and then have different subatomic particles that make different physics and stuff, but at the core it is still the same essence of change, or potential to change, and recursion, with different filters on top. And there's an infinite number of different combinations of filters and senses. So perhaps even then, in a system outside of our system of logic, it is still based in the same fucking essence of anything. But that's not my point. That's just me rolling off just brain thinking right now. But whole thing I'm trying to say is that even in the worst case scenario, ask yourself, would you rather nothing ever have happened in the first place? I'm not just talking about you being born. I'm saying, would you rather have there never have been anything ever that happened? No first thing, no things, no nothing, forever. Because when I asked myself that question, I immediately, instinctively, well, not instinctively, what's a good word for it? Well, let me just say it like this. I immediately respond with no. I am so thankful that anything happened in the first place. Even if I never happened, I still want something to happen. Something should happen. That's what beauty is you can't even define why it should happen. You just know and want and are so grateful something happened. Even if we were never born and to be a part of it, at least stuff exists still. Right? Because if nothing existed ever forever, it's beyond comprehension. It's ineffable. That would be the worst case scenario. That's the true worst case scenario. If nothing ever happened. But we're living in the best case scenario. Because shit did happen. We're happening. And realizing that, is love. And love is eternal and infinite. As much as you define it to be. Close the book. And that's that. In particular, the book that I just closed is Computer Graphics Programming in OpenGL with Java. Very epic book. I am learning shader programming with this book, and also the Tage game engine. It's pretty awesome. Public void int gl auto drawable aspect equals float my canvas get width float my canvas get height. I'd just be reading off shit. Bezier curves. Yeah, I learned I guess technically yesterday in class how OBJ files are formatted, and I'm like, holy shit, this is way more simpler than I thought it was. Go figure. Everything with computers all makes sense and is rooted in logic, so if you understand logic and everything that builds it up, then it makes sense. If you can make sense of everything that builds it up, which you can make sense of it because it's all logic, and we are literally logic aware of itself. I rest my case. I could talk forever about this, and you know it. I could. I would. And I will, as long as I'm alive. As this life, where I keep this knowledge, this relative perception of that baseless, ineffable core root of everything. Anyways, it is now 3:50 a.m. in the morning, Saturday, March 1st, 2025. Oh, fuck. I didn't mean to hit that. Oops. Didn't mean to do that. Just smack the shit out of this pendant I have on my light switch. Which is actually the Eightfold Path. And in the middle it is the yin yang. And there's beads. It's a bead necklace. And hanging from it I have these two little flare looking things. I don't even know what they're called. That came with my cyber helmet. Well, fuck. Anyways, I have my computer booted up now. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to finish this audio log, and then I'm going to have to send it over Discord. But if it's too big of a file size like it was last time for me to send, then I'm going to have to upload it to my Google Drive, and then I'm going to go to my Google Drive, and I'm going to download it, and I'm going to have to put it into Premiere Pro, and then stretch it out, and append the other one to before this one, and then set it to be like 444 by 444, 444 by 888 aspect resolution, and make it all just a solid color or something, so that it takes up the least amount of space possible, so I can still upload it as a video to YouTube. And then I have to convert the .m4a file to .mp3 because I recorded this on my phone with voice memos on the iPhone, and then I'm going to have to upload that to the Internet Archive because the Internet Archive does not accept M4a. That's why I have to convert it to MP3. And then I'm going to go to sleep. Anyways, yeah. I don't really know how to end audio logs typically. Because it's like I say all that shit and now I'm just like, now what? Just be silly and shit on the audiobook. I'm trying to see if I feel like I do have more books that I got. Leonardo da Vinci's Notebooks by Oxford World's Classics. Then I have Notes from Underground, the new translation by Richard Peviar and Larissa Volokhansky, if that's how you pronounce it. But the original is by Fyodor Dostoevsky. I'm sorry, I'm slandering the shit out of this. And then I've also got You're Going to Be Okay Because You're Fucked No Matter What by Darby Hudson. I love his poetry and writings. And then I have How to Hang a Witch by Adriana Mather, which is a book I really liked in high school, and I really resonated with the main protagonist, who was a female. So that was one of the many things that made me realize that I am a very feminine spirit. Realistically, I'm androgynous, but leaning feminine, I would say. In terms of gender roles, I'm very feminine. But in terms of, I don't even know. I ain't even want to start describing all that shit. I gotta describe my whole life story at that point to define that. I have Kaiju number 8, volume 1 and 2 here that I've had for like 2 years and didn't read. I also have Atomic Habits by James Clear, which is a book that my friend Amir put me on. And now I'm going to put all these books back on this thing. My desk. My second desk. My tiny little desk. That I put like a lot of shit onto. I also got this book from my dad, which is new. Okay, that thing covers there's a sticker that covers the fucking title. But Mark Twain, Letters from the Earth. Let's see. I have not read that one yet. And then I have a fuck ton of Chainsaw Man volumes. I have Naruto. I have Berserk. Stephen King, Ready Player 1 and 2. Lord of the Rings. Yeah, more Stephen King. White Thing. Liberty Porter. I don't even know. A lot of these books are old. Black Beauty. What's this one? A Winter. Oh my god, I'm reading this upside down. A Winter. Oh, wait, The Shawl. Never mind, I was reading the freaking author's name. The Dark is Rising. Cormier. The Outsiders. Okay, that's a banger. But yeah, anyways. I'm going to end it here, because I don't want the file size to be any larger than it has to be. So, peace. 3:56 a.m. Final time he's saying the time. March 1st, 2025, Saturday. Yesterday was the National Blackout, which I partook in. And I will continue to partake in other events such as that, including upcoming protests on the Capitol. Peaceful protests, of course, because peaceful protests are far more likely at succeeding in making real change than violent ones. Right. And also, I don't want to harm anybody physically, you know? And hopefully not emotionally. But of course, I'm a human being, so that's inevitable, as I've come to find out, especially with relationships. That's how it goes, because nothing's guaranteed. Once again, the whole point is audio log. Okay, anyways, bye. Okay, maybe not bye just yet. Few more things. I'm sorry, I keep holding you. Keeping you here. On my wall, I got some new posters. One of them is The Garden of Earthly Delights, Hieronymus Bosch, a beautiful painting depicting of visual metaphors, which at the time people thought he was fucking insane, but in reality he was more sane than most people. And Hate Cannot Drive Out Hate, Only Love Can Do That by Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. I have a poster of that, and I also have Gandhi. One of the quotes says, a sign of a good leader is not how many followers you have, but how many leaders you create. And then I also have this scroll kind of thing on my wall that is from the Buddha that says, happiness never decreases from being shared. Thousands of candles can be lit from a single candle, and the life of the candle will not be shortened. So, yeah, I think this audio log is also going to turn out a lot better than the previous two ones that I published on my YouTube channel, because those ones I'm like whispering. It's like early in the morning. I'm trying to not wake people up, so I also kind of sound fucking crazy. This one though, I'm just talking. I still got energy somehow, even though I'm 4 hours of sleep. Probably because I make myself very alert when I'm driving other people. I don't fuck around with that. I need to be awake when I'm driving other people. I'm not about to get in a car crash. That's my fault, and I get them hurt. I don't want that, so in that case, of course I shouldn't be that fucking sleep deprived. That is my bad. I should not do that again. But I got everyone home safely. Of course, it's not guaranteed. In fact, you greatly increase your risk of getting in a car crash by being more tired, because you are more similar to being under the influence, basically. You are slower, you're not as attentive and alarmed, alert. So yeah. I got a few other posters too that I've had for a while, but I just figured I'd say I have The Legend of Zelda, Ocarina of Time, and I also have The Legend of Zelda, Majora's Mask, and these giant ass fucking posters I got side by side, right next to my acoustic guitar, which is right above the Great Wave painting. That's also a big ass version of it. To my right is my Stratocaster, Fender Stratocaster. And right next to my Stratocaster is the pentatonic scales, the Ionian, Dorian, Phrygian, Lydian, Myxolydian, Aeolian, Locrian, and then I have the shapes. Right next to that, I have my whiteboard, which I try to use, and typically I'll go like a month until I actually use it again. So, one of the things I have not erased from it, though, since the time I got it first, is I have in Hindu written the word bodhisattva, and next to it I say, remember the bodhisattva. And the bodhisattva, of course, for the people who chose to wait and assist in having every other conscious being attain enlightenment before they went on with their final enlightenment. Right? Except my thought's different in the sense where I don't think you need to go and die after you reach enlightenment, because true enlightenment is realizing you can keep refining yourself forever. You can keep getting better at balance. It'll never be 100%. But to enjoy the moment while it lasts, and to help other people realize and love themselves and enjoy the moment too. And someone just used the bathroom upstairs, and the pipes in my wall are now making noise again. That is phenomenal. 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 On my wall to my left, behind me as well. Actually, right next to the Zelda posters, I have an Akira poster, and I also have the Starry Night Sky by Van Gogh. And then I have 6 different national parks. I have Zion, I have Yosemite, Rocky Mountain, Yellowstone, Great Smoky Mountains, and the Grand Canyon. I also have 2 posters from my time when I worked at a movie theater as an usher and concession worker and door manager or whatever. I have Antebellum, which was just a poster at the time. That's when I worked there. That was when the movie was out, which is from what's his name? Jordan Peele, I believe is his name, the director who did Get Out and Us, and he also did Nope. And I really loved those movies. And then The Demonic Case That Shocked America, Conjuring 3, I believe, which was honestly ass because it wasn't by the original MFs, but I just have it on my wall because it's Conjuring and it's an actual real movie poster. Those are my only 2 ones that I actually got because I didn't work there very long because that shit sucked ass. I hated working there. It was so soulless. And they didn't even teach me how to do stuff properly, so I would just fucking wing it, and then I would fuck up, and I felt terrible. And then right next to that, I have a Gojira poster. All of it is in Japanese. The only thing I know currently on that poster is Gojira. In the lettering, right, or the kanji or whatever, right? I want to learn Japanese. I want to learn a lot of languages. I just need to keep myself to it. And me reading now a lot is actually a really great pathway in order for me to now go buy books on learning languages that I think would make me really enjoy the process of learning. Because the apps, like the learning language apps, like I don't really keep myself to it as well as I probably would if I had like a full-on book, because that's like kind of how I learned Spanish, that I still use because it's fun to speak in, because I mean that's how I was taught in school. We didn't use apps, you know, just had the book or activity stuff to do on paper and actually talking to people and stuff. I think an app that I could try is like the one where you have to like say it out loud kind of thing, because Duolingo you kind of just type everything, I think, and click things. I don't know. I only really have experience with Duolingo. And then right next to the Godzilla one, I have the Dragon Ball Shenron, which I got custom. It's like a vaporwave kind of thing that I got at an anime convention. It was the second time I went there, I think. But yeah, and then also next to the Buddha stuff, I have a ZZ Top poster. I have Sacramento Kings posters. I have this like Japanese poster of Darth Vader and other dudes. I have these canvas paintings of, intentionally, I picked these out, 3 different canvas paintings. Middle is a tree with white. On the right, it's this harsh red. On the left, it's this hollow blackness. Once again, chorus, root of nothing, trees in the middle, balance between, the whole thing I've been talking about this whole time. I have my certificate on the wall as well. I have multiple certificates now, but this one specifically is from when I was a lifeguard. And then I also have 2 other posters. One is The Great Wave again, and then I have another one that is a Studio Ghibli film, which is Howl's Moving Castle, which is very ironic because I have not seen that yet. I've only ever seen snippets of it when I was younger. So in that case, I should go watch it because I know it's good. There's a lot of things people want me to watch. I have not gone around to watching because I'd be doing bajillion things. Anyways, 4:07 a.m. now. Final note. This is Ashley or Kaiju or all of the above, all of the below. I go by a lot of names. But yeah. You can probably just call me Ashley. Or Kyla. Still trying to figure that out. I think Ashley, I stick more with. Because it's the one I've had the longest. And everyone calls me. So, or you can just call me Kaiju. Yep. That was pretty much it. Okay, goodbye. I'm going to hang up the frickin' phone now. You're still listening? Oh my god, bro. Alright, I'm seriously gonna hang it up now. Oh my gosh. Why are you still here? I told you that I'm gonna hang it up. Aren't you gonna go? You're not gonna... Okay, fine. I'll hang up the freaking thing. Jeez. You're so stubborn, bro. Okay. I'm seriously hanging up now. Okay, bye.